Hi, my name is Bob Binder. I'm a solution architect at X-Rite. Today, in this video, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the enhanced G7 capability of our eXact 2 device. If you want to make use of this feature, just make sure that you have firmware 1.5 or newer installed on your instrument. In the jobs function, we've built in a number of templates for G7 usage. To get into this, I'm going to go into the jobs function, and then you'll see we have a host of different templates in here. We've made it easy to find the G7 templates. If I tap on the button that says Sort A to Z, I can then select G7, and when I do so, it's going to narrow my results down to just those G7 jobs on the device. Today, what I'm going to use is a Grackle 2013 G7 profile. This is very commonly used, and so it just makes sense to use that today. The first thing I'd like to point out to you when I go into this feature, I'm going to begin by measuring my substrate. And we have a toggle switch on this screen, which you can see, and you'll notice that that is labeled substrate compensation. I'd also like to point out the text in this is purple. I'll come back to that in just a minute. We do have the ability to turn this off if we want, but for today's demonstration, I'm going to use it. So I'm going to begin by simply measuring my substrate. And as soon as I do this, you'll notice the display, it's applying that paper compensation, and this will be applied to further readings as well. At this point, we can actually go in and measure any patch we want. Let me turn off the camera for just a moment and show you this. We have auto patch functionality, and if you look at the icons at the top of the screen, the icon for this is that little square with the A in it. If I tap on that, I do have the ability to turn that off, but it's really a convenient feature, so I'm going to leave it turned on for our purposes today. At this point, I can go in and measure any patch I want. So I'm going to continue by measuring the solids of our primary colors. So I'm just going to quickly measure these. As I do so, you'll notice density and delta E values appearing on the right-hand side of the screen. Now that I've measured all of these, I'm once again going to tap the X button to turn off the camera so that we can see this full display. Now we're seeing the solids of all four of our process colors. Again, on the right-hand side of the screen, you're going to see density values as well as delta E values. Along with that, you're going to see best match values for both of those. This will guide your operators to make corrections in the event that that's necessary. I'd also like to point out in the very lower right-hand corner of the screen, this little graph icon. If I select that, that's going to allow us to look at our data more graphically. Here, for example, is an LAB graph of the data. And if I want to see the best match that I mentioned before, we can choose the best match graph, and it'll show this information graphically. To get back where we were, I can just tap the return button in the upper right-hand corner. And one more thing I'd like to point out about this screen before we move on. If you look at the left-hand side where we show each of the colors and the delta E values for the colors, you'll notice that that text is also purple. That's indicating to us that that substrate compensation has been applied to these values. All right, so let's continue on with our measurements. At this point, I can go in and I can measure anything I want. I'm going to measure the overprint values next, but I wouldn't have to. If I wanted to, I could go to my gray valence patches. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to measure each of these. And again, I can turn this off and we can see all the data for those. And with that, let's go ahead and measure our gray valence patches. Here we've got 4 of them. We've got the highlight, the midtone, the shadow, and then finally we'll measure the solid gray valence patch. And the only thing we have left to measure are our screen tints of the primary colors. So I'm going to take just a moment to measure those. So in this case, I'm measuring 25, 50, and 75 for each of these 4 process colors. Okay, now that we've measured all of those patches, I'm going to again turn the camera off. I'd like to point out this series of icons across the top. This allows us to navigate between the different measurements we've taken. This is our solids, our tints, these are our gray balance patches. And the icon all the way to the right is a summary screen. So if I select that, you can now see the data from all of the patches we've measured. You notice that we have a green light next to all of them, which means that everything is within tolerance, and this is a great measurement. This concludes our overview of the enhanced G7 functionality in the eXact 2 instrument. I'd like to thank you for watching.